I found a wooden box in a trash bag the day after my mother's funeral, and inside was a handwritten warning that said, "Do not trust them. Save yourself." That warning set off a chain of events that ended with me standing outside a federal courthouse, watching my sister's empire crumble, and then depositing a check for $275,000 into my new retirement account. My name is Alina Stillman, and this is the story of how I turned my family's betrayal into the most meticulously planned act of self-preservation I've ever executed. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that the truth, once found, will always balance the scales. Now, let's get into it. I am 47 years old, a high school math teacher in a small town just outside Toledo, Ohio. For as long as I can remember, my life has been defined by quiet, invisible labor, the kind that holds up families but never makes it into the photo album. My mother, Marta Stillman, was a retired bookkeeper for a local manufacturing plant, a woman who could stretch a dollar until it sang. She raised me and my older sister Sylvie alone after my father died of a heart attack when I was 12. He was a locksmith by trade, and he owned a small shop in town called Stillman's Locks and Keys. During the summers, he would take me with him on service calls, teaching me how to rekey a deadbolt, how to impression a key, how the tiny pins and springs inside a cylinder danced to the tune of a tension wrench. He used to say that lockpicking was like listening to a language, feeling the clicks in your fingertips. I remember one Wednesday afternoon in the back of his shop, the smell of machine oil and brass shavings in the air, when he handed me a 5-pin quickset lock mounted on a wooden block and a thin tension wrench. "Close your eyes, Alina," he said. "Don't look at the pins. They'll lie to you if you watch them. Feel for the binding order. The lightest touch is the key that opens everything." I never thought those Saturday morning lessons would become the fulcrum of my salvation, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Sylvie was the golden child. That's not just a label, it was a physical fact in our household. She was 3 years older, beautiful in the way that makes people turn their heads, with a cascade of dark hair and a laugh that could convince anyone to forgive her. She had my father's charisma, but none of his discipline. She dreamed big and spent bigger. In high school, it was the prom dress that cost more than our monthly grocery budget. In her 20s, it was the boutique that opened and closed within 8 months, leaving my mother to absorb $20,000 in lease guarantees. In her 30s, it was the condo with the granite countertops and the least luxury SUV, all while her credit cards hummed with minimum payments. And my mother, despite her bookkeeper's soul, could never say no. Whenever Sylvie's ship started to sink, Mom would reach into the savings she had so carefully husbanded, the savings that came from years of clipping coupons and driving a 12-year-old car, and she would bail her out. I watched this cycle repeat for decades, and I learned my role early. The sensible one, the one who did not make waves. I was the opposite. I stayed quiet, got good grades, went to college on a partial scholarship supplemented by a work-study job in the campus library, and became a teacher. I taught algebra, Roman II, and precalculus, the subjects that require a certain immovable patience. I bought my clothes at thrift stores, drove the same faded blue Honda Civic for 16 years, and lived in a small rented apartment with a radiator that clanked all winter. My only real asset was a self-directed IRA into which I had religiously funneled every spare dollar for 25 years. On the 15th of every month, $50 from my checking account would fly into that retirement fund. When I got a raise, I increased it. When I got a tax refund, it went in. I never missed a contribution. By the time I was 42, that account had grown to $130,000, a number that felt like a fortress. It was the engine of my future, the down payment on a little house one day, the security of knowing I would not be a burden. I had visions of a small cottage with a garden and a porch swing, the kind of place my mother could visit and sit in the sun. Then my mother was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. It was a chill February morning when the doctor at the Cleveland Clinic Oncology Wing sat us down in a small, stay-layered conference room. The CT scan lit up on the screen behind him, showing a dark mass that had spread like a careless fingerprint across her pancreas and into her liver. The room smelled of antiseptic and old coffee. He used words like metastatic and palliative and explained that median survival was less than 6 months. Mom was 68, still sharp, still baking her famous cinnamon rolls every Sunday. I sat there, gripping the armrests of the chair, feeling the world narrow to a pinhole. Sylvie was on a speakerphone, her voice crackling as she asked about timelines and quality of life, already adopting that practical, slightly impatient tone I knew so well. When the doctor left to let us talk, I said, "We need to find a clinical trial. Something cutting edge." Sylvie sighed through the phone. "Alina, don't go crazy. Mom's old. She lived a good life. Sometimes you just have to accept things. Mark and I can't afford to get sucked into a money pit." I ended the call. Then I went home and spent 3 sleepless nights researching. I called cancer centers. I emailed oncologists in other countries. I joined forums where families traded stories of experimental treatments. And I found one, an immunotherapy program at a hospital in Frankfurt, Germany, that was using a new monoclonal antibody protocol for pancreatic adenocarcinoma called PDL1 checkpoint inhibition. The early phase data showed a 30% complete remission rate. It was not FDA approved, and insurance would not cover a single penny. The total cost, including 6 months of hospitalization, travel, and living expenses, was $130,000 due upfront. I called Sylvie again, this time with a specific number. "Alina, you know Mark and I are stretched thin right now," she said, her voice carrying that practiced weariness. "We just put a new kitchen in the condo and the BMW lease is crushing us. I can maybe send you $500 for our mother's life." I said nothing, thanked her, and hung up. I stood in my kitchen for a long time, staring at the refrigerator magnet that held a photo of Mom and me at my college graduation, both of us beaming. The sun was coming through the window, and I remember the way the dust motes floated in the light. Then I made my decision. The next morning, I walked into my credit union and asked to speak with Patricia, the account manager who had helped me open my IRA 15 years before. She was a kind woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a chain, and she knew my family. She pulled up my account. "Alina, are you sure about this?" she said, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. "A total liquidation triggers a 10% early withdrawal penalty because you're under 59 and a half. Plus, this will be taxed as ordinary income. At your marginal rate, 22% federal and nearly 4% state, you're looking at a net of around $84,000. And you'll still owe the IRS next April plus penalties if you don't pay estimated tax." I nodded. "I understand, do it." She hesitated, but I met her eyes, and she saw something there that made her click the final button. A confirmation page printed out, the numbers stark and black. I had just emptied my retirement account. I then sold my car, a 10-year-old Corolla with 180,000 miles, for $6,000 to a college kid who needed cheap wheels. I went home and applied for 3 separate credit cards with 0% introductory APRA, sitting at my kitchen table with my laptop, filling out the forms with my hands trembling slightly. Each card approved me for limits between $12,000 and $15,000. I maxed them all out, doing cash advances where necessary, until I had $40,000 in plastic debt. That, combined with a small personal loan from my credit union at 8% interest, got me the full $130,000. I booked the flights, found a furnished studio apartment near the hospital in Frankfurt for €500 a month, and we left. The next 6 months redefined my understanding of endurance. The Frankfurt hospital was a sprawling modern complex with white corridors and windows that looked out onto a garden. I learned to navigate a foreign healthcare system, to communicate with doctors in halting German that I picked up from phrasebooks and night classes on Duolingo. I sat beside my mother while chemicals dripped into her veins and her hair fell out in clumps on the pillow. The side effects were brutal. She had days when she couldn't keep down water, nights when she shook with fever so violently that I had to hold her down to keep the Roman 4 line in place. I remember one particularly bad night when her temperature spiked to 104 and I ran to the nurse's station, my bare feet slapping on the cold tile, my German failing me until I just shouted fever, fever over and over. I held her when she wept from the pain, and I slept on a cot beside her bed, waking every 2 hours to check her vitals and chart her fluid intake. I became an expert in oncology labs, reading her blood work like a stock ticker, watching the tumor markers, the CA19-9 levels, slowly, miraculously decline. Against every statistical odd, Marta Stillman achieved full remission. The day the head oncologist, a stern woman named Dr. Weber, told us that the scans showed no evidence of disease, I collapsed into a plastic chair and cried for an hour. My mother, bald and frail, reached over and squeezed my hand. "You did this, Alina," she whispered. "You gave me time." We flew home to Ohio, and I moved back into the family house on Maple Street to care for her. The house was a four-square built in 1923, with creaky wooden floors, a wraparound porch, and a kitchen that still smelled of cinnamon. I taught full-time during the day and came home to cook, clean, and manage her medications. The debt from the treatment hung over me like a cloud. Every month, I paid down the credit cards as much as I could, but the balances shrank slowly. I drove a beat-up used car I'd bought for $2,000, cooked beans and rice for myself while Mom ate fresh vegetables, and didn't buy a new pair of shoes for 3 years. The soles of my teaching flats were worn thin, and I used duct tape on the inside to hold them together. Those 5 years were quiet and hard, but I treasured them. Mom was alive. I had done what a daughter should do. Last March, a routine follow-up scan lit up like a thunderstorm. The cancer had returned, more aggressive, untreatable. This time, there was no miracle. The oncologist gave us weeks, not months. I took a leave of absence from work, using up my sick days and then unpaid FMLA time. I set up a hospital bed in the living room so Mom could look out the big front window at the maple tree. The hospice nurses came twice a day, and I learned how to administer morphine drops under her tongue, how to turn her to prevent bed sores, how to read the signs that the end was near. Sylvie visited once, for 45 minutes, during which she spent most of the time on her phone, texting under the guise of work emails. Mark didn't come at all. I sat beside my mother, holding her hand, reading aloud from her favorite mystery novels until her voice faded to a whisper and then to nothing. She died on a Tuesday morning at 3:17 a.m., with the first light of dawn just beginning to gray the sky. I remember the exact weight of her hand in mine, the way it went slack at the final moment, and the hollow silence that followed. The grief was a fog I walked through, barely breathing, and then the vultures circled. The funeral was on a gray Tuesday in early April, at St. Anne's, the little church my mother had attended for decades. The stained glass windows cast dim blue and red light over the pews. Sylvie and her husband Mark arrived late, rolling up in a new Escalade, the engine purring to a stop. They wore black designer clothes that looked like they'd been chosen for a photo shoot. Mark kept checking his phone, his thumbs working furiously. Sylvie hugged me briefly, her arms stiff, her perfume expensive and heavy. "Oh, honey, you look exhausted," she said, her eyes scanning the church as if calculating who was watching. During the service, I gave a eulogy, speaking through tears about my mother's courage and her cinnamon rolls and her quiet strength. I had written it on a piece of yellow legal paper, and my voice cracked more than I wanted it to. Sylvie didn't speak. At the reception in the church basement, which smelled of weak coffee and lilies, I overheard them talking to my cousin Greg, a real estate agent in Columbus. "The house should move fast," Mark was saying. "It's in a good school district, and with a little staging, we can get top dollar. $399, maybe $425 if we wait for a bidding war." The house, our mother's home, the Foursquare on Maple Street, where she had lived for 40 years, where I had spent the last 5 years of my life caring for her. The house I had assumed, foolishly, would one day be partly mine. After all, I was the one who had drained her retirement fund and plunged into debt to save Mom's life. Sylvie had sent a card with $50 and a Hallmark sentiment. But in that church basement, I was too raw to fight. I just stood there, holding a plate of cheese cubes, and let their words wash over me. The day after the funeral, Sylvie called a meeting in the living room. I had barely slept, my eyes gritty and swollen, my hair unwashed. Mark stood behind her, arms folded, his posture one of a man accustomed to being in charge. Sylvie produced a 1-page document from a manila envelope with a dramatic flourish. "Mom's will," she said. "I thought you should see it." I took the paper, my hands shaking. It was a simple typed document, dated March 3rd of the previous year, about 3 months before Mom's death, during a period when she had been on heavy morphine for pain and often drifted in and out of lucidity. The will left the entire real estate and all tangible personal property to my beloved daughter Sylvie Ann Stillman. To me, it left a specific bequest of $5,000 in gratitude for her many years of care. The rest of the estate, which consisted of a few $1,000s in a checking account, was to be divided equally. The house, however, was the crown jewel. It had been appraised at $360,000 in the county records, free and clear of any mortgage, or so I thought at that moment. Sylvie was the sole beneficiary of the only asset that mattered. "Of course, I'll let you stay for a little while to get your things in order," Sylvie said, her voice dripping with false generosity. "But Mark and I are going to need to get the house on the market quickly. The market's hot right now." Mark added, "We've already talked to a realtor, a woman named Trish. She thinks we can list it at $399. You'll find a nice apartment, Alina, you're resourceful." I nodded, too stunned to speak. $5,000, an eviction notice. I had given everything, and I was being handed a check and shown the door. I retreated to the kitchen, feeling the world spin and the edges of my vision go dark. I put my hands on the cool countertop to steady myself. That's when I saw the trash bag. Sylvie had been clearing out Mom's bedroom that afternoon, tossing things into heavy-duty black garbage bags with a sort of careless violence. One bag, sitting by the back door that led to the porch, had split slightly, the plastic star bursting from the weight. Poking through the tier was a corner of carved wood. I recognized the grain, the dark cherry wood that had sat on my mother's dresser for my entire life. It was her keepsake box, the one with the delicately carved rose on the lid, a gift from my father on their 10th anniversary. The latch was broken, dangling uselessly, and Sylvie had clearly deemed it worthless junk. I glanced over my shoulder. Sylvie was in the living room, on her phone with the realtor, her voice sharp and businesslike. I bent down, wrapped my hand around the box, felt the familiar smoothness of the wood against my palm, and slipped it into my oversized canvas tote bag without a word. The bag already held a few of Mom's old paperback mysteries. The box disappeared among them. That evening, alone in my childhood bedroom, with the door locked and the curtains drawn, I sat cross-legged on the faded quilt and opened the box. The hinges creaked, a sound that transported me back 30 years. Inside, a velvet tray held a few trinkets. A tarnished silver locket that held a tiny photo of my father laughing, a pair of clip-on earrings my grandmother had worn to church, a dried rosebud from my mother's wedding bouquet, still faintly pink. I lifted the tray, my fingers brushing against the worn velvet. Beneath it, I saw a false bottom, a thin piece of plywood not quite flush with the sides. I had never known it was there. I pried it up with a nail file from my bathroom, the metal scraping softly against the wood. The hidden compartment was shallow, and inside lay a slim, leather-bound diary with yellowed pages and a folded piece of heavy, legal-weight paper. I unfolded the paper first. At the top, in my mother's unmistakable handwriting, the letters a bit shaky but still recognizable, it read, "First codicil to last will and testament of Marta J. Stillman." The date was April 15th of the previous year, 6 weeks after the will Sylvie had shown me. The text was brief and devastating. "I hereby revoke the bequest of my real property located at 204 Maple Street to my daughter Sylvie Stillman. Instead, I direct that the property shall be sold and the net proceeds divided equally between my 2 daughters, Alina Stillman and Sylvie Stillman. This codicil is made because I believe my prior will dated March 3rd was executed under undue influence and duress, and I wish to correct that injustice." It was signed with my mother's name, the letters slightly tremulous but recognizable. The witness signature lines were blank. An unwitnessed holographic codicil in Ohio would not automatically revoke the prior will, but it was evidence, powerful evidence of her intent. My heart hammering, I opened the diary. The entries were sparse, spanning the last year of her life. The first one, from about 11 months ago, read, "Sylvie came while Alina was at work. She sat on my bed, held my hand, and told me I needed to update my will just in case. She said Alina didn't need the house, that she was a teacher with a pension and a simple life. She said if I didn't sign, she would stop coming and I would die alone in a state facility." I was so tired from the pain meds. I signed. I barely remember signing. The pen felt heavy. Another entry a few days later. "The signature doesn't feel right. I barely remember signing anything. I was so cloudy. I'm going to make a secret codicil and hide it where only Alina will find it. The box. The old box with the rose. She'll look there. She always looked for things in little boxes when she was a girl." A few weeks later, Sylvie brought a notary, a woman named Denise. She was very nice, but I don't trust her eyes. They kept exchanging looks. I think I signed something called a power of attorney. I don't remember what it said. She told me it was just for medical decisions, but it looked like a lot of pages. And then the final entry, dated just 3 days before she passed, the handwriting barely legible, pressed into the page with a shaking hand, the letters spiking and wobbling. "Do not trust them. Save yourself." I sat there on my bed, the diary clutched in my hands, and I felt a shift deep inside me. My mother, even in her final, medicated days, had fought back. She had known what Sylvie was doing, and she had planted a seed for me. But the seed needed water, sunlight, and a gardener who knew how to cultivate it. I only had a week before Sylvie would press to have me out. I couldn't just wave this diary around and expect the world to right itself. Confrontation would be suicide. She would deny everything, destroy the evidence, and evict me immediately. I had to become a ghost in my own house, an invisible gatherer of facts. I slid the box back under my bed, tucked the diary and codicil into my nightstand, and began to plan. The next morning, Sylvie cornered me in the hallway as I was coming out of the bathroom, my face still damp from washing. She was holding a clipboard with a multi-page document attached, its pages rustling in her hand. "Alina, honey, we need to talk about the house. Mark and I want to help you transition smoothly. We've prepared a simple form, just a waiver of any potential claims against the estate. It's standard. So many people get confused about probate, and we want to make sure there are no loose ends." She held out a pen, a nice one, maybe a Mont Blanc, its gold clip glinting in the hall light. I glanced at the paper. It was titled, "Release and Waiver of Interest in Estate of Marta Stillman." The legalese, dense paragraphs full of hereinafter and whereas, essentially stated that I relinquished any right to contest the will or make any claim against the estate, that I acknowledged the will was valid and uncoerced, and that I accepted the $5,000 bequest as full and final satisfaction. There was even a clause waiving my right to an accounting. I felt my stomach clench. This was the heart of the trap. If I signed, I was legally binding myself, waiving my right to sue, to contest, to even speak up. Sylvie was trying to lock me down before I could think. I forced a foggy, bewildered expression. I let my eyes go unfocused and my shoulders slump. "Sylv, I can't focus right now. I need time to process. Mom just died. Can I take a few days to read it over? I've been so scattered." Last night I couldn't remember where I put my own toothbrush. I let a tremor enter my hands, and I rubbed my forehead as if fighting a headache. She frowned, her perfectly plucked eyebrows drawing together. "It's just a formality, Alina. Don't make this complicated." Mark's voice drifted from the living room, where he was tapping on his laptop with that aggressive click-click of a man under pressure. "We're not trying to rush you, but we do have a timeline. The estate sale and the listing can't wait forever. There's a window, and if we miss it, the market could shift." I let my gaze drop to the floor. I looked down at my hands, and I let a tremor enter them. "I promise I'll look at it. I just need a little time. Can I please have until next Monday to pack up Mom's things? There are boxes in the basement with old photos. It's all I have left of her." Sylvie exchanged a long look with Mark, the kind of look that was a whole conversation in a glance. He gave a small, tight nod. "Fine," she said, her voice clipped. "But we'll be coming and going to prep the house. The realtor wants to do a walkthrough on Thursday, and don't touch anything valuable. We need to inventory for the estate sale. Everything here is part of the estate now." I nodded, playing the pitiful, compliant little sister. The moment they left the hallway and I heard their footsteps descending the stairs, I slipped into my room, closed the door, locked it, and placed the waiver in my nightstand drawer, right next to the diary. I would never sign it, but now I had a clock, exactly 7 days to unearth enough evidence to stop them, and I knew exactly where to start. That very afternoon, I began my undercover investigation. For the first step, I needed information about Mom's finances. I waited until Sylvie and Mark left for their condo to fetch more packing supplies, their Escalade rumbling down the street and disappearing around the corner. I went to the kitchen, to the drawer to the left of the stove where Mom kept her brain book, a small floral address book with a cloth cover that had been in that drawer for as long as I could remember. She had written down everything in there: birthdays, phone numbers, appliance repairmen, and cryptic passwords. She used a simple cipher, the name of our childhood cat, Mittens, plus a number sequence she could remember, usually a year or a date. I flipped to the back where she had a section labeled Accounts. Under First County Savings, she had written a member number and the password hint, Mittens plus 1947. 1947 was her birth year. That was my mother, a woman who loved patterns and numbers, a bookkeeper to her core. I grabbed my laptop, a battered Dell that I used for lesson plans, and retreated to my room. Instead of using the house Wi-Fi network that Mark had already set up and probably monitored with some cheap router, I connected to my phone's hotspot, the signal weak but private. I navigated to the credit union's website, a local institution called First County Savings with a blue and white interface I had seen her use 100 times. I logged in using Mom's member number and the password, Mittens 1947. The dashboard loaded with the familiar account summary. My pulse was a steady thump in my ears. I clicked on the main checking account, a balance of $312. Pitiful. Then I clicked on the savings account, which I knew had held nearly $40,000 the year before from years of her own frugal habits. The balance now was zero. I stared at that rounded digit, feeling my chest tighten. I clicked on the transfer history. There it was. A wire transfer dated March 18th, 3 weeks before Mom's death, moving the entire balance, $39,850, to an external account. I clicked on the transaction details. The external account was listed by a nickname, Silv Holding LLC, my sister's shell company. I took screenshots, pressing the print screen button, pasting them into a Word document, saving it to a folder on my desktop labeled Tax Records as a decoy. I then pulled up the last 6 months of statements. My eyes tracked the line items. Multiple cash withdrawals, each just under the $10,000 reporting threshold, had been made from ATMs across town. The one at the Sunoco on Monroe Street, the one at the Kroger on Secker Road, the one at the bank's own branch on Douglas. The withdrawals started in late March and continued through early May, totaling $28,400. I recognized the pattern instantly from true crime documentaries and my own reading on financial crimes. Structuring, also known as smurfing, practiced to avoid triggering the Bank Secrecy Act's mandatory currency transaction report for transfers over $10,000. That's a federal offense. I documented everything, using my phone to photograph the screen as backup, the camera making a soft click-click. But there was more. I noticed an additional account linked to Mom's profile, one I hadn't seen before. It was a home equity line of credit, a HELOC, opened just 2 months before her death. I clicked on it. The credit limit was $120,000, and the draw had been taken in full on March 19th, the day after the savings account was drained. The promissory note was digitally signed. I couldn't see the signature image online, but I noted the critical date and the loan number. I also pulled up the account that showed the draw, an initial disbursement check for $120,000 deposited into an account at a bank in Delaware. That account's name on the deposit slip image, when I finally found it buried in the document portal under check images, was Silv Holding LLC. The timeline was forming a noose. Sylvie had used a power of attorney to bleed Mom dry and encumber the house with a massive cash-out loan, all while Mom was barely conscious. This wasn't just betrayal, it was elder abuse and wire fraud. I felt a cold fury settle into my bones, replacing the grief with something harder, sharper. I logged off, cleared the browser history, and hid my laptop back in my teacher bag. The next piece of the puzzle came from the garbage. The day after the funeral, Mark had spent an entire afternoon in the garage with a heavy-duty crosscut shredder, a Fellows model that could chew through credit cards with a grinding, metallic roar. I had heard the whirring from my room, that mechanical sound rising and falling. He had fed stacks of papers into its jaws, then tied the resulting confetti into 2 clear plastic bags and placed them in the blue recycling bin out back, right next to the empty bottles and newspapers. Under cover of darkness, around 2 a.m, when the house was silent save for the occasional creak of floorboards, I pulled on a headlamp from my emergency kit, slipped out the back door, the cold spring air hitting my face, and retrieved those bags. They were surprisingly heavy. I carried them up to my bedroom, locked the door, spread an old white sheet on the floor to catch any stray bits, and dumped the first bag. What followed was 2 nights of painstaking forensic puzzle solving. Crosscut shredder particles are small, about 1/8 of an inch by 1/2 inch, and they interlock in a chaotic, 3-dimensional mess. I used a pair of tweezers from my bathroom kit and a magnifying glass I'd kept from my coin-collecting hobby in college. My process was methodical. First, I sorted fragments by color and edge type: white office paper with laser-printed black text, light blue-lined journal paper with handwritten ink, green and white checkered graph paper, and a few strips of yellow legal pad. I focused on the white office paper, as it seemed the most official. Piece by piece, I began matching edges. This is like a jigsaw puzzle from hell, but I had patience. My father used to say that locksmithing was as much about patience as it was about tools, about letting your fingers learn the shape of the problem. That same patience guided my fingers now. I used a roll of acid-free Scotch tape to reconstruct pages on a sheet of cardboard, pressing each shard down carefully, aligning the tiers. At one point, I thought I heard footsteps in the hallway and froze, my headlamp beam pointed at the wall, my heart pounding so hard, I was sure it would give me away. The footsteps passed. It was just the old house settling. After 6 hours of work, my back aching, my eyes strained from the headlamp, I had partially reconstructed 3 critical documents. The first was a reverse mortgage application from a company called Omni Bridge Lending, filed in Marta Stillman's name. A reverse mortgage allows a homeowner over 62 to convert home equity into cash, but the fees and interest can be predatory. The loan amount was $120,000. The signature on the application looked shakily like my mother's, but the date was March 20th, a day when Mom had been in the hospital following a minor fall, barely able to lift her head. I had sat beside her bed from 6 a.m. until 9 p.m. that day, charting her fluid intake and output on a notepad, eating a vending machine sandwich for dinner. Sylvie had visited briefly at 8 in the evening, brought a bouquet of grocery store flowers that still had the price sticker on the cellophane, and then left after 20 minutes. I now knew she must have returned late that night, when I had gone home to shower and grab a change of clothes, and either coerced the signature or forged it outright. The notary stamp on the application belonged to a mobile notary service, Denise's Mobile Notary, the same woman the diary had mentioned. Later, I would look up her notary commission number in the county records online. She was licensed, and her business address was a P.O. box near Mark's construction company's office, which was a red flag if I'd ever seen one. The second reconstructed document was a promissory note from a private lender called Rittman Capital. It showed that Mark's real estate development company, Harrison Flips LLC, owed $210,000 with a balloon maturity date 60 days after Mom's death. The note was personally guaranteed by both Mark and Sylvie, their signatures scrawled at the bottom. If they didn't pay by that deadline, the entire balance would accelerate, and they would face a personal judgment. Their condo, their cars, their bank accounts, everything would be at risk. The timeline was brutal. They needed the house sale proceeds to extinguish that debt, and they needed it fast. That explained the frantic pressure to sell, the realtor already lined up, the push for me to sign the waiver. The third document was the most chilling. It was a handwritten list, in Sylvie's loopy cursive, on blue-lined notepad paper. The heading at the top read, Project Clean Slate. The steps were enumerated in neat numbered rows. 1. Get Mom to sign new will done 3/3. 2. Have her sign POA done 3/5. 3. Open HELOC need ID and doc done 3/19. 4. Drain savings done 3/18. 5. After death evict ASAP. 6. List house sell pay off Rittman note. 7. Establish new life fund. There was even a note scrawled on the side in a different pen color, maybe added later. E could be a problem. She might contest. Need to isolate her, move her out fast, discredit if needed. Say she's emotionally unstable, a hoarder, maybe a danger to herself. I stared at that page, reconstructed inch by inch over hours of work, and I felt a strange calm settle over me. The plan was laid out in my sister's own handwriting. I now had evidence of conspiracy, elder abuse, fraud, and intent. I photographed every piece in high resolution with my phone, making sure the lighting was good and the text was readable. I stored copies in an encrypted cloud folder, the password a string of numbers and symbols that only I would know. Then I hid the original reconstructed pages behind a loose floorboard in my closet, a spot I'd used as a teenager to hide my diary. I replaced the board, pressed the carpet back down, and stood up, my knees popping. But the shredded documents weren't the end of the trail. I needed to get into the study. My father's old home office, a small room off the living room with a built-in desk and shelves, had been converted into a catch-all storage space years ago. When Sylvie and Mark started managing the estate, they changed the lock on the study door, a simple quick-set entry knob with a keyhole, and moved all Mom's important paperwork in there. The door was always locked now, and Sylvie kept the key on her keyring, which she wore clipped to her purse like a trophy. I needed to know what they were hiding. On Thursday afternoon, Sylvie and Mark announced they were meeting their attorney, a man named Gerald Finch who specialized in estate planning, to expedite the probate process and get the paperwork finalized before the weekend. They would be gone for at least 3 hours. I said I'd stay home to pack more boxes, looking as harmless as possible in my old sweatshirt and jeans, my hair in a messy bun. As soon as their Escalade pulled away and the sound of the engine faded, I went to the basement, to the corner where my father's old tool chest still sat, gathering dust under a drop cloth. I pulled open the bottom drawer. Inside, wrapped in an oily cloth, were his lockpicking tools, a set of picks in a worn leather case, a tension wrench with a twisted handle, and a few jiggler keys. I hadn't used them in years, but the moment I held the tension wrench, the muscle memory flooded back, the way my father had taught me to feel the subtle feedback through the metal. At the study door, I knelt and examined the lock. It was a standard quickset 5-pin cylinder, no security pins, the kind you could rake in seconds if you knew what you were doing. I slid the tension wrench into the bottom of the keyway and applied gentle, steady rotational pressure with my thumb, just a whisper of force. With my other hand, I inserted a half-diamond pick to the back of the plug and began a rocking motion, dragging it across the pins in a smooth, rhythmic seesaw. I felt the first pin click, a tiny vibration like a heartbeat through the metal. The second pin clicked, then a slight give in the plug. I adjusted the tension, breathing slowly, feeling the sweet spot. A third click, a fourth, and then that tiny, satisfying rotation, that fraction of a turn that told me the shear line was aligned. The lock turned with a soft snick. The door swung open. I stepped inside, closed the door behind me, and relocked it from the inside using the thumb turn, just in case they came back early. My heart was hammering, but my hands were steady, the way they always were when I was solving a math problem in front of a class. The study was a mess of storage bins and cardboard boxes, the air musty and stale. I ignored the clutter and went straight to the tall, 3-drawer filing cabinet in the corner, a gray steel behemoth. It was locked too, but with a simple wafer lock in the top drawer. I selected a jiggler key from the set, one with a generic profile, and inserted it. A jiggler works by mimicking the shape of a key while you apply tension and wiggle it up and down, hoping to catch the wafers at the shear line. I worked it for 30 seconds, sweating slightly, the key jangling softly, aware that even a small noise could carry. Then the lock popped with a metallic click. I slid open the top. Inside, hanging folders were labeled in Mom's neat hand. Tax returns 2010-2018, medical records, insurance. But tucked behind those folders, hidden like a secret, was a thick manila envelope with no label. I pulled it out, my fingers trembling slightly. The contents made my breath catch. The envelope contained the original last will and testament, the one Sylvie had shown me, with a notary stamp dated March 3rd and signed by the same Denise. Behind it was the durable power of attorney document, dated March 5th, signed by Mom. The signature looked suspiciously fluid, too steady for a woman on heavy opioids. I'd spent enough time watching my mother sign things in her final months to know her signature had become a shaky, erratic scrawl, like a seismograph during an earthquake. This one was almost normal, with loops and flourishes she hadn't been able to form in months. But more damning was the attached notary page. The notary was Denise again, and the stamp included her commission number and the statement that the signer appeared before her and acknowledged the document voluntarily. The POA granted Sylvie unlimited power over all financial matters, including the right to open accounts, transfer assets, and encumber property. It was, in legal terms, a blank check. Behind that, there was a folder labeled Hellock Docs, and it contained a copy of the promissory note I had partially reconstructed, along with a check image showing the disbursement of $120,000 deposited into the Delaware account for Sylv Holding LLC. The paper trail was now complete. I photographed everything page by page with my phone, making sure the images were crisp and the text legible, then carefully replaced the envelope exactly as I found it, the folder nudged back into its hiding spot. I locked the cabinet using the jiggler again, then unlocked the study door from the inside, stepped out, and relocked it with the tension wrench, the deadbolt sliding back into place with that heavy click. I slipped back to my room, my pulse racing but my mind clear. The evidence was damning, but I needed to understand the legal landscape and find the final piece, the safe deposit box. The next day, I made a phone call. I remembered my mother mentioning a lawyer years ago, someone she had consulted when updating her will before the cancer. Her name was Claudia Herrera, an elder law and estate litigation specialist with a practice in downtown Toledo. I found her number in Mom's brain book, under lawyer, written in blue ink. I didn't want to use the house phone, so I walked down the street to a little diner payphone and called her office. The receptionist was cautious, but when I said Marta Stillman's daughter, the tone shifted. "Mrs. Herrera has been expecting your call," she said. "We arranged to meet the next morning, a Saturday, at a diner off I-75, far from prying eyes." The diner was called the Blue Dolphin, a classic greasy spoon with red vinyl booths and a jukebox that played old Motown. The air smelled of bacon and coffee. Claudia was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with a cup of black coffee and a leather briefcase open beside her. She was a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her 60s, with gray-streaked hair pulled back in a tight bun, eagle-sharp eyes behind tortoiseshell glasses, and a courtroom voice that could cut glass. I slid into the booth, and without preamble, I laid everything out. I had organized everything in a 3-ring binder with labeled tabs. The codicil, the diary entries transcribed and photographed, the screenshots of the credit union accounts, the reconstructed shredded documents in plastic sleeves, the photos from the study. The binder was heavy, and I slid it across the table. Claudia listened without interruption, her glasses perched low on her nose, flipping through each page, occasionally making a small humming noise. When I finished, she removed her glasses, polished them on a napkin, and said, "Alina, this is one of the cleanest cases of tortious interference with an expected inheritance I've seen in 30 years of practice. Tortious interference is a civil claim that happens when someone intentionally prevents you from receiving an inheritance you would otherwise have received. Your mother's diary establishes the undue influence and duress. The shredded project clean slate document shows conspiracy and intent. The financial records show the actual theft and fraud, including elder financial abuse, forgery, and wire fraud on top of the civil claim. You've given me enough to file a civil suit immediately, and we need to refer the criminal aspects to the FBI's Elder Fraud Task Force. But first, we need to freeze the property so she can't sell it out from under you. There's a mechanism called a lis pendens, a notice of pending litigation that gets recorded against the property title and warns any potential buyer that there's a lawsuit over the house. No title insurance company will insure a sale with a lis pendens, effectively freezing the house. We file that on Monday." She paused and took a sip of coffee. "We also need to get you out of that house as safely as possible. Don't sign anything, not even a grocery receipt they hand you. Play along until the legal papers are filed." Then Claudia leaned forward and her voice dropped. "Your mother came to see me about 6 months ago," she said. "She was very sick, but her mind was clear that day, one of those window of lucidity days. She told me she was worried about Sylvie's pressure, and she had already made a secret codicil, but she was afraid Sylvie would find it if she kept it at home. She said she took that codicil to her bank, First Ohio Savings, to the branch manager, a Mr. Patterson. She signed a fully witnessed version in his presence, and he stamped it with his official seal. Then she placed it in her safe deposit box. But here's the clever part. She changed the box's registration to a joint ownership with right of survivorship, with you as the joint holder. She made sure that only you could access the box after her death. She said, and I quote, 'Sylvie will never think to look there, and Alina will find the key. The key is in my dresser drawer, taped under the drawer, but I know Sylvie will never look there either.'" Claudia opened her briefcase and handed me a small brass key, slightly tarnished with a number stamped on it. She gave me a duplicate for safekeeping, just in case. "The box is yours now, Alina. Go Monday morning and see what she left you." My hands trembled as I took the key. I turned it over, feeling the weight, the cool metal, a dead man's switch. My mother had set a trap that would only spring if I, the overlooked daughter, found my way there. I tucked the key into my pocket, pressed it against my thigh through the fabric, a talisman. That night, I barely slept. On Saturday, I kept playing my role, packing boxes of old books and clothes, looking exhausted and compliant. Sylvie and Mark were busy with their own preparations, making calls to the realtor, and they seemed satisfied that I was harmless. I even let them see me carrying a box of my teaching supplies out to my car, as though I were preparing to leave. The medical scare I decided I would stage later to truly test their humanity. Monday morning, I left the house early, saying I was going to the library to use the internet for apartment hunting. Instead, I drove to First Ohio Savings, a small brick building on Main Street with a drive-through window and a heavy front door. I parked my beat-up Civic, walked inside, and asked for Mr. Patterson. He was a kindly man in his late 50s with a graying mustache and a calm demeanor, the sort of banker who remembered your name and asked about your family. When I said my name and presented the key, his face softened. "Mrs. Stillman spoke of you often," he said, his voice gentle. "She was a fine lady. She came in personally to make sure this was done right. Follow me." He led me to the vault, a massive steel door with a combination lock, and inside. He used his master key and my key in the dual lock system for the box, a long metal container. He pulled the box out and placed it on a table in a private viewing room, then left me alone with a box of tissues and the hum of the air conditioning. I lifted the lid. Inside, lying on top of a neat stack of papers, was a folded document identical in wording to the one I'd found in the wooden box. This one, however, had a witness line filled in with a shaky but legible signature, and the date July 2nd. The notary section bore Mr. Patterson's embossed seal and stamp, with his commission number and the words, "Subscribed and sworn to before me." A fully executed codicil. Beneath it was Mom's original will from 2010, the one that split everything equally between Sylvie and me. A stack of Series EE savings bonds worth about $30,000 that she had bought 20 years ago and let mature, and a letter in a cream envelope with my name written in her familiar script, the ink slightly faded. I opened the letter with trembling fingers. The paper smelled faintly of her lavender lotion, the one she used every night before bed. "My darling Alina," it began. "If you are reading this, I have passed and you have found your way here. I'm so sorry I was too weak to stop Sylvie in those final months. The cancer took my body and the drugs took my will, but I want you to know this. I saw her for what she was and I planned for you. The codicil in this box, properly witnessed, revokes the fraudulent will. The box itself was my dead man's switch because I knew Sylvie would never value the old dresser box. Only you would look inside. Only you would find the diary. Use the evidence, use the diary, and take back what is rightfully yours. I love you more than any house or any dollar. You gave me 5 extra years, Alina. I spent every one of them watching you be the daughter I always knew you were. Be free of them, with all my love, Mom." I folded the letter and wept, there in that cold little room, the sobs tearing out of me, my shoulders shaking. But I didn't let the tears linger. I wiped my eyes with the tissues, carefully placed the codicil, the bonds, and the letter back into the box and closed the lid. I had work to do. I met with Claudia that afternoon, and she filed the lis pendens and the civil complaint the next day. The lawsuit listed causes of action for tortious interference with an expected inheritance, common law fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, conversion, and a petition to enforce the codicil. We also submitted a criminal referral to the FBI field office in Cleveland, along with a package of evidence that included the Project Clean Slate document, the reconstructed bank records, and a detailed timeline. In the days before the lawsuit was actually filed, I decided to stage a test. I had been playing the role of the foggy, compliant sister for almost a week, and I needed to know if there was any shred of humanity left in Sylvie. I had a doctor's appointment scheduled for a routine checkup, but I amplified that into a staged medical scare. I had researched the symptoms of a vasovagal syncope, a sudden drop in heart rate and blood pressure that causes fainting. I knew the precursors: lightheadedness, sweating, tunnel vision. On Thursday evening, I skipped lunch and drank a large cup of strong coffee on an empty stomach to make my heart race. Then I deliberately dehydrated myself to feel lightheaded. I practiced the collapse in my room, letting myself fall onto a pile of pillows. Around 7 p.m., I was in the kitchen, putting away dishes from the drying rack, the ceramic plates clinking softly. I heard Sylvie's heels clicking on the linoleum. I waited until she was 3 steps into the room, then I clutched my chest with my right hand, let out a gasping moan, and crumpled to the floor. I didn't fling myself down violently. I collapsed as authentically as I could, letting my knees buckle and my body slide against the cabinet. My head hit the floor with a dull thud that was real enough to make my ears ring and a sharp pain bloom at my temple. I lay there, eyes half closed, breathing in ragged, shallow bursts, my left arm splayed out at an unnatural angle. I could feel the cold linoleum against my cheek and the pulse thumping in my neck. Sylvie stopped. I could see the toe of her designer boot, a sleek black leather, a few inches from my face. I waited for her to scream, to grab her phone, to dial 911. Instead, her gaze slid past me to the kitchen counter, where the realtor's listing agreement and a pen were sitting. She had been pressuring me all week to sign that waiver, and now she had another document, this one authorizing the sale. She stepped over my body, her heel grazing my outstretched hand with a deliberate pressure, a sharp dig that made me bite back a cry. She snatched the paperwork. "Alina, if you're not dead, we need to get these signed tonight," she said, her voice completely flat as if she were commenting on the weather. "I don't have time for your drama. Mark's waiting in the car and we have a showing tomorrow." She didn't lean down. She didn't touch my face. She just walked out, and I heard her in the living room telling Mark, "She's being dramatic again. Probably just wants attention. I swear it's always something with her." I lay there for a full minute after her footsteps faded. My head throbbed where it had hit the floor, but the pain in my chest was something else entirely, a clean, cold severing. I pushed myself up, brushed off my jeans, and felt something inside me snap cleanly. Any residual guilt, any hope of reconciliation, any lingering childhood loyalty evaporated like steam. I was now fully committed to her destruction. The confrontation, when it came, was swift and surgical. Sylvie discovered the list pendants on Monday morning when her realtor, Trish, called in a panic. I was in my room, packing books into a box, carefully wrapping each one in newspaper, when I heard Sylvie's voice rise to a shriek from the living room. "What do you mean a cloud on the title? A lawsuit? Who filed it? Alina, that's impossible." There was a pause, then the sound of something being thrown against a wall, a heavy thud. Footsteps stormed down the hall, and my door flew open so hard it banged against the wall. Sylvie stood there, her face contorted, mascara smudged from what might have been panic crying, Mark right behind her, his expression dark and his fists clenched. "What did you do, Alina?" she screamed, her voice cracking. "You filed a lawsuit, you're contesting the will. Do you have any idea what you've done? The sale is off, we needed that closing next week, we're going to lose everything." I looked at her, my voice steady, a calm I didn't know I possessed. "I know about the reverse mortgage, I know about the forgeries, I know about Project Clean Slate. The FBI has been notified. Your little scheme is over, Sylvie." Her face drained of color, going pale as a sheet. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Mark started blustering, stepping forward, his face reddening. "Listen here, you little. You can't prove anything. That's all hearsay. We'll sue you for slander. You're going to regret this." I pulled out my phone, not to call anyone, but just to show them the photo of the reconstructed Project Clean Slate, the image clear on the screen. I held it up. Sylvie's eyes went wide. She knew her own handwriting. The bluster collapsed into a desperate, pleading tone. "Alina, listen, we can work this out. The house needs to sell. There's a safe deposit box at the bank. Mom's box. It's in both our names or something, I don't even know. But if we open it together, there might be enough in there to pay off the debts, and then we can split whatever's left 50-50. Just come to the bank with me and we'll make this right." She didn't know I had already emptied it, that the box now held only emptiness. She was playing a desperate last card, hoping the box contained hidden cash or stocks. I pretended to consider it, letting my eyes drop and my shoulders slump again. "Fine," I said, my voice quiet. "I'll meet you at First Ohio Savings on Friday at 2 o'clock. But no tricks. I spent the next 4 days coordinating with Claudia and with a detective named Detective Ramirez from the Toledo Police Financial Crimes Unit, who had been assigned to the case after the FBI referral. I told them Sylvie would walk into the bank expecting to find treasure. Instead, she would find an empty box and a trap. Mr. Patterson was briefed and agreed to have the box ready, empty, on the appointed day. I placed a single sheet of paper inside it, typed on my laptop that read, "The truth is already with the authorities. You're about to be arrested." I also placed a small digital audio recorder in my purse, a silver Olympus model I had bought at Radio Shack the day before, with Detective Ramirez's approval. Under Ohio law, one-party consent for recording is legal, so I could capture any admissions Sylvie might make without her knowledge. I tested it that morning, my own voice playing back in the empty bedroom. Friday at 1:50, I arrived at the bank. The afternoon sun was bright and harsh. Sylvie and Mark strode in at 2 exactly, looking tense but still projecting that brittle confidence. Sylvie wore a navy blazer and pearls, trying to look respectable, but her eyes were darting. Mark was in a suit that didn't quite fit, the shoulders too wide. We were escorted by a teller to the safe deposit box room. The room was small, with a table and 2 chairs. "Mr. Patterson brought the long metal box and set it on the table, the metal clanking softly. He inserted his master key and I inserted mine. The dual lock system clicked. Mr. Patterson stepped back. Sylvie moved forward, her hands reaching. He lifted the lid. The box was empty save for my single sheet of paper. Sylvie snatched it, her eyes scanning the words, her face going from confusion to shock to rage. "What is this? Where's the stuff, the bonds, the papers?" She looked at me, her face twisting. "UB****CH. You already emptied it. You took everything." At that precise moment, the door opened and Detective Ramirez entered, a solid man in a gray suit with a badge on his belt and a shoulder holster barely visible, flanked by a uniformed officer. "Sylvie Stillman Harrison and Mark Harrison," he said, his voice carrying that quiet authority that made the air feel thick. "You are under arrest for financial exploitation of an elderly person, forgery, and wire fraud. You have the right to remain silent." Sylvie's scream echoed in the marble lobby outside as they were handcuffed, the metal bracelets clicking shut. Mark tried to pull away, his face red and sweat breaking on his brow, but the officer secured him quickly, pressing him against the wall. I watched, my arms crossed, my expression blank, my purse clutched against my side with the recorder still running. As they were led past me, Sylvie spat, her voice venomous. "You'll regret this, Alina. We'll drag this out for years. You'll be broke and alone and no one will love you." I met her eyes and said the words I had been holding for weeks, the quote I had practiced in the mirror, my voice calm and even. "You never saw me, Sylvie. You only saw what you could take. But I'm not a doormat and I'm not a victim. I'm the one who balanced the books." The legal aftermath was brutal and public. The criminal case moved quickly through the system. Sylvie and Mark spent a night in county jail before making bail, but the evidence against them was overwhelming. The diary, the reconstructed documents, the bank records, and the recording from the bank, where Sylvie's own words confirmed knowledge of the scheme. They eventually accepted a plea deal to avoid trial, pleading guilty to attempted felony theft and elder exploitation, with the forgery and wire fraud charges dropped in exchange. They were sentenced to 3 years of probation, full restitution of the stolen $40,000, 200 hours of community service, and they had to undergo financial counseling and mental health evaluations. The real punishment came in the civil case. Claudia Herrera amassed an airtight paper trail that left no room for doubt. She deposed Denise the notary, who broke down and confessed that Mark had paid her $500 to notarize documents without the signer present, claiming it was just paperwork stuff. Her license was revoked. The court ruled that the March 3rd will was procured by undue influence and duress, and it was set aside. The properly witnessed codicil from the safe deposit box was admitted to probate, ordering the house to be sold and proceeds split equally. However, because of the fraud and the reverse mortgage that Sylvie had taken out, the damages went further. The forensic accounting, performed by a court-appointed expert, a CPA named Robert Vance, revealed that the reverse mortgage had paid out $120,000 to Sylvie's LLC, money that she had used to temporarily satisfy the Rittman note, just staving off default. The court ordered that from the net sale proceeds, after paying off the fraudulent HELOC and legal fees, the remaining amount was to be divided, but with a surcharge against Sylvie for the stolen funds. The house sold for $360,000, exactly the appraised value. Realtor fees of 5% and other closing costs reduced the net to about $338,000. The reverse mortgage lien, plus accrued interest and penalties, consumed $135,000. The remaining $203,000 was split per the codicil, giving each sister $101,500. But that was not the end. The judgment also awarded me compensatory damages for the theft of the $40,000 from Mom's savings, plus punitive damages and legal fees. Ohio's Elder Financial Abuse Statute allows for treble damages, meaning the stolen amount is tripled. The final order required Sylvie to pay me $275,000 in total, a sum that encompassed my rightful inheritance, the tripled stolen funds, and my attorney's fees. To satisfy the judgment, Sylvie and Mark were forced to liquidate their assets. Their condo in the fancy development with the granite countertops was foreclosed. The Escalade was repossessed in the middle of the night, the tow truck's lights flashing in the dark. Mark's construction equipment, the backhoe and the skid steer and all the tools, were auctioned off piece by piece at a sheriff's sale, the auctioneer's gavel falling. They moved into a small, cramped rental apartment on the east side of town, a place with thin walls and a parking lot that flooded when it rained. The $275,000 was wired into my attorney's trust account 6 months after the trial, and I deposited it into a newly opened SCP retirement account that same afternoon, an account I had set up with Patricia at the credit union, who cried when she heard the news and hugged me over the counter. I used a portion to pay off the last of the credit card debt from my mother's treatment, debt that had lingered like a shadow for years, the balances finally reaching zero, the statements showing a clean slate. I bought a modest 2-bedroom condo near my school with a small garden and a view of a pond where ducks landed in the morning. It has a porch with a swing, just like I had dreamed. I set up a scholarship fund in my mother's name, the Marta Stillman Scholarship for Future Accountants, and the first recipient, a young woman from a tough family who worked nights at a diner, starts at community college this fall. I still teach algebra, but now I drive a slightly newer car, a sensible sedan with a working heater, and I sleep at night without that gnawing worry about retirement, without the cold sweat of waking up and wondering if I'll have enough. The wooden box sits on my dresser again, and inside, I keep the diary and a copy of the codicil and the letter, not out of bitterness, but as a reminder of my mother's cleverness and courage. She had been a bookkeeper to the very end, balancing the scales from beyond the grave, the debits and credits of a family finally reconciled. And as for Sylvie, I saw her once at a Kroger grocery store about a year later. It was a cold November evening and the fluorescent lights were harsh. She was wearing worn jeans and no makeup, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, her cart filled with generic brand cereal and canned soup. The cart had a squeaky wheel, a high-pitched whine. Our eyes met in the cereal aisle. For a moment, I saw something flash in her gaze, something like anger or maybe shame, and then she looked away first, her jaw tight. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just walked past, my own cart holding fresh produce and a loaf of bread, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Pure, quiet, earned peace, the kind that settles into your bones and stays. Have you ever discovered a dark secret about someone you trusted completely? How did you handle it? Let me know in the comments below. And if you believe that staying patient, gathering evidence, and letting the truth do the heavy lifting is the most satisfying form of justice, hit like and subscribe for more stories of quiet reckoning. I'm your host, and I'll see you in the next one.